Should we get started?
I think so.
I'm ready.
Okay. Welcome everyone. We are very excited to have Michael Carter here and to talk to us about diversity, inclusion, mentoring, and a whole host of other topics. We're really excited you're here to join us. As always, we have our Q&A panel as we go through. Please add questions that you have either based on the content or things you've wanted to ask on this topic. We have the chat function open as well. Please, both those panels are down at the bottom of your screen, labeled QA and chat. We'll answer throughout. We'll also take questions at the end. And then as we get to the end, we do have the opportunity to be a little more interactive. It's Friday morning, it's coffee time.
I got mine here too.
And mine's full disclosure, compliance people, mine is tea, but I wouldn't want to start the day out with compliance people and security people without truth. But we'll have the opportunity to turn cameras on if you want. It's up to you. But actually to ask questions and do other things that way. So let's get going. Michael, welcome. We're really glad to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. I want to thank both you and Lisa Beth for having me this morning. I'm excited to be here. I've learned more about your fabulous organization and some of your members. And so I just want us to have a robust, fun conversation this morning.
I think we're all ready for
make that happen.
And you're both looking so fabulous. So, boy, I
think I told you you're looking fresh and ready today.
Yeah. So if I may, I'm going to share my screen. I brought a few slides with me. That's what people in my field have a tendency to do. All of the information that I'm going to share, we're going to put on your wonderful website, so people will have access to it. And as we go through this, you just may want to take a few notes. But again, my name is Michael Carter. I am CEO of Intercultural Competence Edge. I am so honored and happy to be with you today, and I'm going to share some thoughts with you. And let's hope we don't have any technical problems, but we're all used to this new wonderful world of virtual. So here's the three things we're going to cover today. And here's my objectives. And this is what Dan and Lisa Beth told me I better cover also. But we're going to talk and learn and create some shared meaning on the core concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I use that word shared meaning because oftentimes we have these discussions around diversity and equity and inclusion, and we talk right past each other. So to make sense out of some of the things that's coming later, I'm going to give you a crash course on some of these definitions and how my company in particular use them. Then we're going to explore the relationship between intercultural competence, or the relationship between inclusion, I should have said, and mentoring. That is the crux, and that's the reason we're all here. And then we're going to have Q&A. I want to talk about how inclusion affects you, okay? And so let's get started with this first section. First, I wanted just to back up just a little bit, because in creating shared meaning is always helpful if you know who I am. So Intercultural Competence, we have been around for about 6 years. We work with a lot of corporate clients, nonprofits, school systems. Everything that I'm going to talk about today is research-based. I'm not here to give you my opinion, but what I'm trying to give you is food for thought from experts on this particular topic. And then you see a little bit of my background. I'm from the East Coast, attended Syracuse University, University of Rochester. I spent 25 years at a major company here in town. I'm in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area. So I worked for the Post-it note maker, the Scotch brand company, 3M Corporation here in town, and had a fabulous career there. And I've been doing this work for around 13 years, but I've been an advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion for over 30 years. So that's just a little bit about me, so you know who's talking to you. And then I want to share one important thing on our journey together this morning, because I consider this a journey. And that is, many of those interculturalists that I just showed you in the last slide, they firmly believe that when you go into judgment, curiosity just goes right out the door. And so what I'm going to encourage is that You stay in curiosity. You don't have to believe a word I'm saying. Okay, you can say, oh, he's all washed up. But at least take it in, think about how it applies to your life, go out and reflect on what I'm saying. We learn that way. All right. And so we want to remove any impediments to you taking in certain information. So here we go. I'm going to do a little crash course on some of the core concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion again. And then we're going to open it up for some chat and conversation. So bear with me for just about 10 minutes as I get us all on the same page. So first of all, the why. That's what I like to call this slide. What's this whole thing about diversity, equity, inclusion? Why does it keep coming up? And why do I have to keep hearing about it? And this man in front of me right now is making a whole career out of diversity, equity, inclusion. This is the why, and this is what my clients are looking for. It's on 3 levels. The individual level, creating that sense of engagement, having people feel like they belong to your organization. On the group level, it's all about creating more productive teams, having better ideation and innovation, creating that sense of belonging. Keep that word in mind, belonging. I'm coming back to that word because that's one of the key words for this morning. And then on an organizational level, the jury is in. There's been some major research by major universities that looked at companies that took diversity, equity, and inclusion seriously. And what I mean by seriously is that they are doing workshops and education. They are looking at their systems and trying to change them and make them more equitable. And they compared them to companies that are doing pretty much nothing or maybe just a little lip service around this particular topic. And what they found was on a very consistent basis is that companies that was taking this work seriously, their stock prices and market value was much higher than the companies that did not. See, here's one of the things I want you to walk away with and just know diversity is inevitable. It's happening. The country is changing. It's, as some people like to say, it's becoming a little bit more brown. Hopefully that's not something that's fearful. That is something that can be very positive because we are a nation of immigrants. And so it's all about making this wonderful experiment we call America work. All right, so that's my take on things. So let's go a little further on some key definitions that we'll use later in our discussion. Diversity, my company and many other interculturalists like to define it broadly, is it includes white men and whites in general. I just have to go just say that right away. And I'm going to be very candid and very open with you. And at certain times, I may even make you uncomfortable. So it includes, whites, and diversity, as we define it broadly, it includes diversity of personality, diversity of thought. And so diversity is just that wonderful kaleidoscope of differences. Inclusion is making diversity work. We used to think diversity in and of itself was just going to work, but research has shown that's not the case. You have to use some of the tenets around inclusion to make diversity work. So D without the I, and as we call it, diversity and inclusion, this can be just okay. And inclusion means making everyone feel a part of the team, having a seat at the table, allowing them to eat also while they're at the table, meaning having a sense of respect, of feeling respect, having a sense that their voice is heard, having a sense that they can give input to the direction of the team. That's having a seat at the table and also eating. So that's diversity and inclusion. And then intercultural competence. My company is named after this skill and mindset. We are Intercultural Competence Edge. And so intercultural competence is just that. It is a skill. And being a technical skill, it means that you can be assessed on it. And there is a very popular assessment called the IDI. Many of you may have heard of it. It tells you how interculturally competent you are. And then because it's a skill, you can improve. And so I've been on the journey of trying to increase my intercultural competence for at least the last 15 years. And it is a journey without a fixed destination. So let me make some connections here. if diversity is all sorts of colored nails and inclusion is tools like a hammer and other things to help you work with those nails and make those nails effective, then intercultural competence is like going to school to become a carpenter, how to cut, measure, and become very good at diversity and inclusion. It is that skill that you can, again, improve upon. And then equity and belonging, those are the goals. Okay, so let me take you through equity and belonging.
Michael, I have a
Before we-
quick
Oh,
question
yes,
for
thank
you.
you.
And
Thank you.
I'm now going to try and put the videos back on because
Okay.
I'm playing with technology and it may not always work.
Okay, great. Thank you for stopping me. Okay. Mhm.
No, so my question is this is a, you talk, if you go back to the last slide, you
Sure.
talk about the increasing the competency. Are these things that become innate, or are these more like soft skills that that people often have to continue to work to keep at the front of their mind versus being something that are more autonomic?
You know, excellent question, and I normally don't separate it that way, Dan. And so intercultural competence is it's people skills. I don't usually use that word soft skills, but it's people skills
I like that.
that you do have to continuously work on and keep it, on the conscious level is what I like to call it. Okay, because you can be assessed on how interculturally competent you are, and a lot of these things are already in you, but then what we try to work on is bring it to the conscious level. So as you're interacting with people who are different than you are, some of the tenets of intercultural competence and principles and disciplines are just always there. But eventually, just like any skill, we want a lot of the things to become habitual.
Okay.
So you don't have to think so much about it. So you see how I say it's kind of both of those things. Stay conscious, but then we want to just create certain wonderful habits. Thanks for asking that question.
Sure.
And so a few other quick things. I was talking about what is the goal. And so I like to use this slide and make a comparison between equity equality, excuse me, and equity. Equality and equity. Equality is a value of most Americans. Treat people fairly, treat people the way you would like to be treated. If you were to go and look up American values, and I recommend everybody do that, you'll get a list of things and equality will be on it, okay? And we judge people by certain values like equality. But the higher level of working interpersonally with people is equity, all right? Equality is usually dealing with giving everybody pretty much the same thing. We got to treat everybody fairly. I can't give Dan something and not give it to Lisa Beth, because Lisa Beth will be upset with me, okay? And that's not always necessarily true. What I need to do is really recognize Dan versus Lisa Beth as individuals and give them what they need to be successful. And it may not be the same thing. And that's what's happening on the right side of that slide. But here's the thing, as you see, based upon these individuals' heights, they get so many boxes. But here's the thing, if you look at the right side of that slide around equity, is the entire team being successful, especially if the goal is harvesting those apples. On the left side, when you treat everybody the same, because sometimes people don't have equal access and all sorts of things like that, only one of the three. On the right side, equity allows us all to be treated as individuals and be successful.
Well, that's such a great point. And I think I
Right.
10 different examples pop to mind of how
Okay.
people are using those words, and just in my own life, having using those words perhaps incorrectly or not to that definition.
Right.
And it puts so much more clarity behind it. Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah, no, equity helps us all. Sometimes we think, oh, you're giving one person more than I'm giving the other person, but at the end, who does it help? Everyone. And just to remind everyone, we are going to put these slides on the website, so you'll get a chance to get them. And then belonging. This is such an exciting topic for me. And I'm a geek around this diversity, equity, inclusion, and intercultural competence. So you see these books behind me. You may not want to read all this stuff, but there's a lot of new fascinating work on belonging and how it ties to neuroscience and how we are wired as social animals. And that is, as social animals, we're more like foxes versus bears. You see the thing down at the bottom. Bears get together, have babies, and they go a separate way. Leave me alone. We are more wired to be social animals, work in packs. From our early days, as if you believe in cavemen and cavewomen, we work together. And part of it may have been because we're slow compared to other animals, and we needed each other to survive. But our brains have this thing that actually is not always wired for inclusion, and that is we constantly look at our environment, especially when we go into a new one, and we do an us versus them. Do I belong or do I not belong?
Yeah.
And most people have probably experienced at some point joining like a book club, joining the ski club, joining something in high school, and you say, oh, I just don't feel like I belong with that group. And then you've had other experiences where you became a deacon at the church, joined some other group, and you just said, God, it feels like the moment I walked in, I belonged. And so that's what belonging is all about, that sense that you sort of get.
It's interesting that you bring this up too, Michael, because we had another session not too long ago that talked about the neuroscience of belonging, because it's so important from a communication standpoint, right? You need
Yes.
to understand your audience. So all of these things tie in together. We had Julie Lusbrock talking about the neuroscience of communication, networking, and connecting. And that's important in the diversity realm and inclusion realm as well. So these are skills that are transferable, whether it's communications, just, as part of your job, or
Right.
if it's mentoring and team building. So I'm so
Absolutely.
excited to see how the science behind this connects to so many different facets. And that's what we're really excited about for MentorCore members and for people in our professional community.
Absolutely. Excellent point. And so, I recommend people really study this thing around belonging. I've been very fascinated by it. But now here's the thing. If you don't get that sense of belonging, it creates that second bullet there, trauma. And trauma can slowly but surely become chronic. Along with trauma is this whole thing around loneliness. You can be in a crowd, you can be in your organization and still have this little feeling of loneliness because you don't belong. So two things to think about on this whole topic of belonging, and we have limited time, so I really encourage you to go even deeper than I can take you right now, and that is, in your current organization, do you have that sense of belonging? That is something you should strive for, something you should think about. What's going to make you have that sense of belonging, okay? And then on the flip side of that, one thing I want you to think about around belonging is, are you contributing in your work group to other people feeling like they belong? All right, it's a two-way street. You want to make sure you feel a sense of belonging, and you don't want to contribute to other people feeling like they don't belong. See, Lisa Beth, this is the way we do things around here.
Right.
That can contribute to people feeling like they don't belong.
Right.
And
So
ultimately, though, at the end of the day, it remains with you or with your organization to ensure that that sense of that belonging is there and the environment is to foster that are there. I mean,
right,
you said it's bidirectional, but at the
right.
end of the day, it's ultimately the individual that needs to make the decision as to whether or not it's sufficient.
Absolutely. And when I go in and I'm working with organizations, I really encourage their leadership also to really get in touch with this particular topic,
Right.
because it helps the entire organization. And we're going to connect belonging to mentorship in a few more slides. Because
Excellent. I'm very excited
mentorship,
about this.
yeah, because mentorship helps with this whole belonging thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I just want to take a quick little side path. There's a few more slides. Just real quickly, there's a lot of definitions around culture. I'm going to talk about intercultural competence, so I need to define culture real briefly. But it's shared norms, values, and beliefs that a group forms. Culture, according to Gerf Hofstede, and there's again different definitions out there, forms at the group level. If we were to take everybody on this call, drop us on a desert island, we would form culture. Dan is responsible for getting the water. Lisa Beth, you do this, but not only operational things, but we also will start to form mental frameworks around values, norms, and beliefs. And from the different groups we belong to, we get cultural influences that affect our identity. Man, I'm hitting you with a lot with that whole statement right there, but try to grasp just a taste of that whole statement. And everybody's seen an iceberg. When we talk culture, we are really focusing more on cultural differences around values, norms, beliefs, not food and dress. Okay, those things are fabulous and wonderful, but it's really that hidden stuff when we're trying to create productive mentoring relationships. Okay, culture operates on lots of levels, nationality and social class. One of the focus areas around mentoring, though, around culture is identity groups. Okay, I belong to multiple identity groups. I am Black or African American. I am male. I am from the East Coast, that you know. I was a 3M'er, working for that company. I am a father. I belong to multiple groups that affect the way I see the world. That's why, Lisa Beth, you and I see the world slightly differently, and Dan, you and I see the world slightly differently. We're all unique individuals, all right? And so I want to just talk, a little bit about or share identity groups. So thus, intercultural competence is the gap between different cultural aspects, and they can be down to race, gender, generational. That's what intercultural competence helps you with, narrowing that gap. It's an individual and organization's ability to recognize and adapt to cultural differences, okay? And you get to a point where you understand, I know, Lisa Beth, we see the world differently. Sometimes what we want to do is jump too much to commonalities. Hey, you're a parent, so am I a parent. You're from this state, so am I. And that's wonderful. That's a wonderful way to start a relationship, but we also have to become more aware of our wonderful differences. And that's what intercultural competence is about, all right? And oftentimes, and this is the last slide, and then we're gonna open up for some discussion, okay? And so oftentimes, this is what I am called in to do as a interculturalist and study of diversity, equity, and inclusion, is that we are trying to recruit, let's just use gender for an example. I'm gonna use gender as a thread through this conversation, but we could talk about race and ethnicity and a lot of other things. But they'll say to me, Michael, we need your help. This is our situation. And I'm gonna talk about this outer ring. We are trying to diversify our compliance department. We have all men, okay? We need some gender diversity. Women bring some wonderful sensitivities that we feel like we are missing, okay? Very good reason to diversify, right? And also a very good reason to ask for a particular type of diversity, okay? Again, we define diversity very broadly. And so here's what we did, Michael. We formed a group. We formed a little task force of 6 people. And they took a look at how we were recruiting and what colleges we were recruiting from and some of the questions we were asking. Then they made some changes to our way of recruiting people because we just wanted a more diverse slate of candidates, and we felt that diversity would happen naturally with that diverse slate of candidates. And then we implemented. I don't know what we did wrong. It just didn't work. It didn't happen. Maybe women just don't want to work in this field. Maybe they don't want to move to our city. Maybe this is just not right. All these type of things. The moral of the story is bad inputs in gives you bad outputs. People can join that task force and they have all sorts of preconceived notions. That's the bad inputs. They come in with unconscious biases. Intercultural competence helps you to mitigate your unconscious biases. And I asked the question, how many of you have unconscious biases? And
Every
everybody should
single
raise
one of
their hand.
us.
Everybody raise their
Not
hand.
me.
Right. Okay. And so that's why intercultural competence is that core skill. It helps you mitigate those unconscious biases, your preconceived notions. I mean, you're already coming in thinking that this environment doesn't work for women. So what are you going to
Right.
get? The results that you already think you're going to get, you know? So anyway, I like to show that. And so that's how intercultural competence helps foster diversity, equity, inclusion. All these different things around retention, pipeline, succession planning. A more interculturally competent group will be more successful. Okay, so did you guys all survive those definitions?
Yeah.
It was a little tough
They're
going there, but we got there.
You got
No,
there,
I
okay.
think I think it's really important to set the stage with
Mhm.
common definitions, so we can go into
Right,
the next part of the discussion.
right,
Having a
right.
common platform.
Yeah, and I've been trying to watch the clock, so I think I did pretty good,
Oh,
you
I
you're
know.
think
good.
you're great.
It's all good.
Okay, so, and hey, this work doesn't always have to be heavy. Sometimes you hear the word diversity, equity, and inclusion, and like, oh my God, do I have to go to one of those classes? It doesn't always have to be heavy. It's important. We need to learn a lot, but we can laugh a little bit along the way also. I couldn't do my job if I was not allowed to laugh. Okay, so let's talk about the relationship between inclusion and mentoring. And we're going to tie some of these concepts together. You guys ready?
Let's
Ready.
do it.
All right, let's go. All right. The relationship between inclusion and mentoring. Mentoring helps create inclusion and belonging. Pretty basic little statement there, right? And we already talked about earlier why individuals, teams, and organizations want higher levels of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And why my company even exists. And so mentoring can play a major role, and it has played a major role in my life. I've been mentored, um, and I've been a mentor. So I've been on both sides of it. I've been in formal mentoring programs that the company encouraged, again, because they are looking for more engaged employees. And I've been in informal mentoring programs. And I know Dan and Lisa Beth, you know all the different versions of mentoring. Um, and so as that second bullet says, mentoring helps the individual and organization, that sense of belonging. The organization gains productivity. Inclusive mentoring, tying some things together. We're building a house here. Takes intentionality and competence. All right. Um, and so part of inclusive mentoring is all around cross-cultural mentoring, around some of the topics of gender, ethnicity, race, generational ableness. All right. It takes being intentional. Dan, it kind of relates to one of the questions you were asking earlier. It takes me being conscious that I need to work a little bit more on my mentoring relationship when it's cross-cultural. Here's one of the things that's kind of unique about cross-cultural. When you think gender, ethnicity, race, almost all relationships are cross-cultural.
Yes.
All of them. Now, now some are more cross-cultural than others, you know, because there could be bigger gaps based on maybe race or something, but almost all relationships are cross-cultural. So these tenets and tools around intercultural competence helps all mentoring relationships. And that's the tie between trying to create higher levels of inclusion and mentoring. And I'm going to, we're going to do a little exercise. Part of the way I like to teach, because I just said this and you just all said, yep, I got it. Okay. You said, I got it. Okay. But now,
Now the rubber is going to hit the road, right?
that's right. I'm going to show a little case study from one of my workshops. And then we're going to have a chat about it. And then we're probably going to come back to this very simple slide. Okay. And it'll make a lot more sense. So here we go. Here's something I want everyone to read. And I have to make sure I can see the chat also. And as it says here at the bottom, what additional advice do you have and how should she implement it? So I'll let everyone read. And so we'll just pause for a second. Okay, so you hear it a second time, let me read it aloud. That always helps a little bit. And then I'm going to ask a question. You become a part of your company's formal mentoring program. As we said, it can be formal or informal. You are the mentor of a young white woman. During one of your conversations, she states that she feels she is not being heard in meetings. She is one of 2 females on an all-male team of 8. She states they seem to only truly communicate with each other. You advise her to be more assertive in the meetings. You are the mentor, right? She responds that she is concerned that by asserting herself, she can be seen as emotional, sensitive, and having a chip on her shoulder. She also fears being labeled the B, the whiny, or not a team player. I didn't say the word just
And for
because
the B word, we're talking bossy, right? Because
right.
every woman who's assertive is bossy.
You guys did tell me it's only adults on this, right?
It is
Okay.
only adults.
Yes.
And I probably would have taken that word out, but I'm so used to use it in class because we get down into the, let's talk about
The
this.
nitty
But it is,
gritty, right?
but being realistic, it is the word. It
Yeah.
is the word that many people bring to mind.
Yeah, right. Okay. So as a mentor, what additional advice do you have and how should she implement it? Give me some thoughts on the chat and let's just have a conversation here.
Well, I'll tell you because, well, we're going to look at my younger self. Although I think my current self also gets labeled a little bitchy every once in a while. But, it, it is tough getting advice to either be more assertive or to just state your mind, because you are going to be like invariably labeled as being the dragon lady, difficult to work with, overbearing. I mean, I've got plenty of different synonyms for the sentiment that you are too pushy.
And Lisa Beth, what do you think? And this is not just a question to you, but to both you and Dan. Where does some of that come from? That being how, if you express yourself kind of in a assertive way versus a guy, you get these labels he does not oftentimes. It can actually get positive. It can actually get positive labels sometimes of, oh, that's wonderful how he asserts himself and blah, 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 blah. Where do you think that comes from?
I think it's absolutely some gender stereotyping.
Yeah.
Where it's, based on somewhat antiquated gender roles about how women and men are supposed to interact in the workplace, at home, etc. And, it's really harmful because the same behaviors in men are lionized and prized, and it's called being courageous. Whereas for women, it's kind of frowned upon and considered to be a career derailer, which limits our ability to be able to state our minds and have those conversations without having a negative judgment placed on it.
Yeah. And
very well said. Okay. And Dan,
my answer would be, you shouldn't have to change what you're doing. But unfortunately, the world around you operates in a particular way. So if outcomes is what you're in, if trying to get to a particular outcome, work with individuals, take a little more change management approach, organizational change management, where you're giving people, more one-on-one direct feedback versus in groups. People tend to be a little more receptive to that interaction in a one-on-one interaction versus 2 men on 1 woman. but I think, and then the comment that came up in the chat, I think, is really valid here about
Right.
this is not a problem. The person in the group can't be expected to fix the whole problem. I do think though that somebody should be identifying, hey, this is this is a problem. This is not how we should be interacting, is
Mhm.
important to do, but doing it in a way that will be that will be received and listened and heard is different than, hey, you need to stop doing this.
Right.
But the problem is that person, that woman in the interaction isn't the problem. This comment
Right.
is very correct. The system and the infrastructure and the underlying gender stereotypes are where the problem ultimately lies. So my question back to you, Michael, is it better in this case to educate on the flaw in the system, or is it better to focus on achieving the outcome that's necessary for the business, or that achieving your outcome for the good of the group?
Okay. So excellent question as always, Dan. Okay. And it's my answer is almost like your last question. It's both. And so this is what I mean by both. And that's why I asked Lisa Beth a particular question. It is very helpful to have some knowledge around why these things happen. All right. And it does come from the way we're all socialized. It comes from biased media. It comes from movies, the way women are projected versus men. You know, it comes from, as Lisa Beth was saying, certain stereotypes that exist out there, and that they're constantly told, and they become what I call like the narrative, okay? And so it is helpful, and it has been helpful on a personal level with me being African American, dealing with things that are similar to this, to have some knowledge on it, okay? So now let me get to the and. So it's kind of like I was saying, both. Um, and then it is important to figure out, how do I navigate this? And what's good about this, let me say that right. There's nothing good about this. I'm just speaking a little bit. But what's really helpful about this is that you have someone who's helping you. You have your mentor, and you have someone to talk to. And that's why mentorship can help in situations like this. Okay. You are talking to this other person who may have experienced this, may have experienced it differently than you, and you're coming up with solutions to get Dan to that outcome. Okay. So I'm going to give you some more thoughts on this, but before I do, because there's a certain way to approach this that I'm going to explain. I want to have a few more minutes of conversation and look at the chat room a little bit more. You rock, Mary. Great comment. Thank you on behalf of the system itself and the men in this meeting. I apologize. This meeting on the slide, that is. Okay. For me, the problem with this, okay, yes, no, Mary, we are with you. We are with you. And what you would hope for, Mary, is that the organization is bringing in help in learning how to dismantle systems like this. And a lot of organizations are around that whole title of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, absolutely. But now, in the meantime, we have to help this person deal with the current situation. And how do you go about this? Any other thoughts? And then I'll talk a little bit more. Give you some. Go ahead.
I've had some situations
Mhm.
where people have felt like they haven't been heard in meetings.
Yes.
And sometimes, if you're in a position to control some of the agenda, it makes a huge difference. And I know that, particularly for folks in information security, legal compliance, other risk functions, when you have an incident, sometimes it's easy to listen to the people who are the loudest in the room. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I always try to do when I structure meetings is to give space for each of the functional areas to
Mhm.
be able to speak. And
Mhm.
that means for the people who are in the room to have that opportunity to speak with the expectation that everybody is going to listen. and that we're giving respect and space to everyone, regardless of, who they are, what title they have, etc. That's
Mhm.
one of the ways that I think you can kind of set an expectation that people will be heard. But right, it becomes harder if you don't have control over the agenda, and you need to then, I think, find allies who will either echo some of what you're saying, find a way to help amplify maybe some of the messaging, or, and I know that this happened really commonly with women in the Obama era, in that presidential team, but find ways that you have either allies or people who are willing to say, let's make some space.
Great, Lisa Beth. Okay, hey, you just gave all the answers. That is wonderful. So I'm going to frame some of your answers a little bit. That is wonderful. So let's just talk about the mentor-mentee relationship, and let's just go ahead and let's assume the mentor is a male in this particular case. The case doesn't really say that, but let's assume it's a male, and the mentee came to him saying this. So let's do some do's and don'ts. Okay. Here's some of the don'ts. One of the don'ts is, are you sure that's happening? Um, you know, um,
Well, I love the
that happens.
gaslighting approach. Like, it's not really
Yeah,
happening. It's
yeah,
just.
that happens. That happens to everybody.
You
You
must
know,
be you must be
are you,
mistaken in your feelings.
are you being too sensitive? Okay, that's the don'ts. And let me tell you, I've coached mentor-mentee pairs, and that stuff happens all the time.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, here's another don't. Well, let me tell you, I felt that happened to me, Lisa Beth, and so we're going to be this cross-cultural mentoring pair. And this is how I handled it. I just talked louder, and sometimes just hey, I would just jump into the conversation, and I would do this and I do that. Okay, why is that a don't? Because it's a don't, because what I'm not recognizing and not hearing is your experience,
Mhm.
right? What's going on with you? I am not doing what I call empathetic hearing. I am hearing it from my male point of view. And this, as a male, even though I'm not always conscious that I'm saying this is the way I would handle it. I just pound on the table and tell them, hey, let me speak. Okay, that's another don't. Here's some wonderful do's in this situation. And there's no just one right answer to this, all right? Some do's is listen, and really listen, almost like I was saying earlier, without judgment and with curiosity. Lisa Beth, tell me some more. Help me to understand. Okay. Um, and take it in. It's not your place to judge. It's to say, okay, that's the reality of the situation. It does not matter whether I believe it or have questions or all that stuff. Put that aside. Now you can move forward with, I'm not sure that being more assertive is a bad answer, but it's how you play it out. See, Lisa Beth, you gave some wonderful examples around, okay, I've got to create a voice somehow. So maybe I will do this or that or this or that. All right. And then part of the bottom line to this case study is also, if you are that mentor, that other person, it's just so important to listen and create an environment of trust so that Mary or Lisa Beth or whoever it may be can even say this to me.
Mhm.
See, a lot of times a person's not going to even say this. That's the one thing that can be a little unrealistic about this. Um, you know,
It
um,
feels, I gotta say, it feels super vulnerable. And,
right,
as a person who's being mentored, my
mm,
initial thought would be, oh man, he's just not gonna understand because he's probably never experienced this,
right,
right? He can't, it
right,
feels like you can't see me, right? And I'm,
right, right. That's it. And I've truly been in those situations as an African American, really something pretty similar to this. And with some mentors, I would go ahead and say it, but I say it really kind of mousy sometimes because I just know, okay,
Yeah.
well, let me just give you my opinion, Dan. And, this may not be absolutely right. And I may not be seeing the situation absolutely right. And,
Couching it.
because I
A
never,
million ways that you just undermine your statement, right?
that's right.
To try to
Yeah.
make it feel more comfortable.
Right. So as we know, trust is important. Intercultural competence really helps you. Building that skill helps you to hear empathetically. And I want to, if I am the mentor, create a relationship where you can say anything.
Mm-hmm.
Just say it. It's your perspective. I'm not going to judge. And
Right.
so maybe one part of this whole thing is that the person was able to even say it, because in a lot of cases you can't. All right, because the person
Right.
just won't get it. All right, so uh, um, just wrapping this up a little bit, and this is where inclusion, intercultural competence all plays a role in just this case study, is create that environment of trust, think cross-cultural. My experience is not Dan's experience, it's not Lisa Beth's experience. Listen empathetically. Let me hear what she is saying and take it in. All right. It's her reality. I have to somewhat make it my reality to have a conversation. Then brainstorm together. I don't need to tell you my story of how I handled it, because the way I handle it may not work for you. Okay.
Right.
Let's brainstorm together. And again, Lisa Beth, you jumped in with some really just good solutions on, it could be, let me talk to the leader of this group and say, this is one of the things I would like to do. I would like to have a spot on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has to listen in. I want to, if I'm going to present, I want to send some things ahead of time behind. You know, you may sit there also and say, God, why do I have to do this extra work? But one thing I would say, whether you are Black, male, whatever your ethnicity is, your ableness, we all have to sometimes work a little bit harder to belong.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an exclusive gender thing. It also happens with white men. If you're from the East Coast and you're now dealing with people in the Midwest. So as the mentee, this is some of the things you're trying to learn and brainstorm with your mentor. And you want to not go into this whole mindset of, why do I have to do this extra stuff? Why can't it just be this way? All right. Hey, I really think organizations should be working on the system, but we're not always there. So you do have to put in the work and the effort, but you have your mentor to help you with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, guys? You guys got flying colors on this case study. And just imagine if you were in a workshop, especially when we could get together live, you'd all break up into groups and chart it out and come up with answers.
Yeah.
And it's,
And we just got a great question in the
yes,
chat. And
that's it.
honestly, it's one that I feel I can kind of relate to on a different level.
But
But
don't
it's
tell us
about
how you solved it.
nope, 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 nope. But right, I can feel like my own experience and feel for the person who wrote in. Talking about unconscious biases, how deep do you actually go in a work environment? Right? We all know that sexism and racism runs very deep. How do you ensure that inclusion doesn't just stay on a really superficial level? And this person has actually said that they've dealt with racism in their own family because the person's mother is white and the father is Black, and her white grandmother didn't want to meet us until she was on her deathbed. So sexism, racism, and inclusion can run really deep and be really, really profoundly harmful. So what do you do at work? How do you make sure that inclusion isn't just window dressing,
Surface
basically?
level. Or limited to a work
Surface level.
environment, but
Right.
Right.
counteracted at
We
home.
have a great diversity policy, but the
Right.
experience of it is far from great.
Right. And so from what I have experienced is that is when, an organization needs to bring in outside expertise. I hesitated a little bit when I was saying that, only because I was about to say that's when the organization needs to bring in a consultant like me. But that's why I said that so
Plug away. It's
slowly. I
okay.
was trying to, but that's when an organization really do need to bring in outside expertise to do things like companies like mine do. We do assessments of where your organization's at. We come up with ways to dismantle certain systems that have been in place that may not always have been put in place with bad intentions, but it can be having negative impact. So I try to approach things from a neutral standpoint. Oh, you bad people put these systems in place and it hurts minorities and women, and some bad things do happen, but a lot of times the systems were just put in place from a historical perspective where the workplace was primarily white men. Okay, and those systems still exist, and those are some of the things that we have to dismantle and change.
So let me ask
And
a
then
little bit.
one last
Go
little
ahead.
thing. The third leg of the stool is really education does matter. Having people become more self-aware, self-understanding, dealing with their unconscious biases, because unconscious biases, they are unconscious. Sometimes you can have, neutral intent and have negative impact. And so those are the things that help an organization move forward. I'm sorry, Lisa Beth, what were you going to
So
ask?
let me ask a little bit different question. What
Mhm,
if you're not in a position to
mhm.
be able to, right, make decisions about, bringing in a
Right.
consultant? What if you are a person who, and I think about this, from my perspective, when I was younger in my career and
Mhm,
in different roles,
mhm.
right? How do you identify something that is about inclusion where you're not feeling included in a way that can yield results that will be helpful to you if you don't control how the company is addressing it?
Right. So that is a very difficult situation, and I have been in it actually many
Mhm.
times. Um, my short answer is that's where you do look up this word intercultural competence, and really start to educate yourself on it, because really what it will help you do is understand some of the why some of these things are happening, and maybe happening to me in particular.
Right.
It also will give you at least a little ammunition on how to counteract things. But at the end of the day, you are not always in a position to completely change your environment.
Right.
And so what it helps you to do also is to assess your environment and say, is it something, or is the environment at a place where I can maybe make some adjustments and survive and create a sense of belonging? Or is this environment one in which it is so far gone that I may never get that sense of belonging, which can create some loneliness and trauma in my life, and I need to move on? And so that is my real world, suggestion there.
Wow.
Educate yourself. It helps you to see things more clearly, and then you can make a better decision on what's right or wrong for you.
Well, I know that we're coming up towards the
Good.
end of our
Okay.
time here,
Right.
and I want to make sure we ask you our special question, which is,
Woo-hoo.
what's the best advice that you ever received from a mentor?
Okay. So my mentor, good question. And it relates to what we've talked about. Um, when I first got to you know, 3M, and I had a wonderful career. Um, and I didn't use these words back then, but I struggled with having a sense of belonging. I came in as a newly minted MBA. Um, it was 1986. I was pretty much the only African American in the department. So that's going to make you feel a little awkward just out of the chute. And here's one of the things that would happen, and I'll be real brief with this story, is that there was some kind of culture going on where um, a group of guys, and of course they were all, white, would sort of congregate outside of my cubicle and maybe shout a little bit, hey, anybody going down for lunch? And then probably 8 or 9 of them would get together and then go down. And so I said, okay. Nobody didn't really invite me. So one day I went down, and boy, was it awkward. It was almost like they were speaking a different language. I just culturally, I couldn't relate. I'm from New York City, Midwest. I don't do the things they do and stuff like that. And boy, how am I going to really fit into this department? And so I went to a mentor, a person who had been at the company, had really climbed the ladder. And I said to him, this is what's going on. I think it's rude. I don't feel invited. When I even went down on my own, I just felt like I didn't belong. And the person said, here's my advice to you, Michael. Just simply don't wait to be invited. You go and you sit at that table down in the cafeteria with those other people for a minimum of 3 months. And I said, oh, okay. And so here's where I give myself some credit. I was wise enough, even at the age of 26, to take that advice and do it. So for the first couple of weeks, let me tell you, it was torture. I don't know what they were talking about. I felt like I hadn't been invited. And then slowly but surely, I started to understand the conversation. Some of it was, corporate jargon that was particular to our particular division. Some of it was starting to better relate to people who are different than me and had lived different lives. And, I didn't even have a family at that point at 26. And slowly but surely, it started working. And I did get that sense of belonging. And some of those people are still my friends to this day, even though I've retired from 3M. And so if I had not had that mentor, if I had not gotten that advice, I would have lasted all of 6 months and would not have had the wonderful career I had at the 3M company. Okay, so that is how important I think a mentor can be, because it really changed my whole trajectory, because I might have gone somewhere else and run into something very similar. And here's the thing, that group of people, I did learn they did not have bad intent in the way they operated. It was part of their culture. As I learned later on, they weren't really inviting hardly anybody. It was just kind of a shout out. You ready? Let's go down and have lunch. And so that's how important a mentor can be.
That's
That's
fantastic.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful advice. Michael, thank you so much for being
Oh,
here. We're going to close out the talk portion here, and we'll stop the recording. So for those of you who are watching this on replay, see if you can come and join us live for some of these where we have the live conversation. But in order to foster an open conversation, we're going to stop the recording and allow folks to turn on their cameras if they so desire and continue the conversation. To those of you who are watching on demand, thank you for joining us.
and there's my last slide.
I love it.
Thank you so much, Michael.